Hello and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. Today we have three incredibly special guests. Our instructors this year for the Writers of the Future workshop, Tim Powers, Dave Farland, and Orson Scott Card. They just finished the workshop and I asked them to stay behind for a few minutes just to give a little overview of what happened in the last week worth of the workshop.
I'm Dave Wolverton. I'm here with Orson Scott Card and Tim Powers, and we just got done teaching the workshop for the writers that were the winners for volume 35 of the L. Ron Hubbard's Writers of the Future contest. This is an annual event that goes on before the awards ceremony. I've been doing it now for 35 years. The workshop that we taught is a little bit unusual in that the writers that we have already sort of demonstrated that they're writing publishable fiction and that they have the possibility of having careers. And so it's unlike other writing workshops in that we're not teaching the basics of this is what a story, this is how it is, this is how you parse a sentence, here's the beginning and middles and ends. We talk a bit more in this workshop about building a career and how you go about that. L. Ron Hubbard put together a number of essays that were used by Algis Budrys and L. Ron Hubbard with the very first volume. And those essays talk about things like how do you interview a person? How do you get ideas for stories? Once you have an idea for story, how do you put it together into a story format and get it written quickly? And these types of things. So this is what we're focusing on for this week, and the kind of thing that we've been doing for 35 years now.
I'm Tim Powers, also an instructor at the workshop, and I've been instructor and judge since I think 1987. So I've seen a whole lot of the winners over the years, and it's been long enough now that we've been able to look back and assess how successful the program is. And fortunately, it proves to have been very successful. Of any year, I think it's accurate to say that at least 50% of the winners of that time have gone on at least to publish professionally, and very often to establish solid careers. So obviously, the program works. And I think one of the big virtues of it is that Hubbard set it up so that only unpublished people could participate, could enter. I'm sure fiction writing, science fiction writing, has always been a difficult arena to fight your way into. And so this provides real talented writers with, at the very least, a shortcut, an easy way in, where otherwise they might have had to spend years at trial and error and finding out what does and does not work, and possibly simply giving up. So it has been fun to participate in this, and then I always want to unreasonably take credit for all their subsequent successes.
I'm Orson Scott Card. I took part in two of the early workshops, and then I've been a judge off and on over the years since then, but I have not taken part in the workshops except as a visiting lecturer doing about a half hour or an hour. And then not regularly. So all of this evolution that Tim and Dave have seen, I came in, it's like, a grandchild that you see once as a baby and then again at age 5, and you just go, oh wow, not the same human at all. Though I will say that some things are a constant. You were talking about how the students have prepared themselves and that this is sort of an easier way in, but I suspect not. I mean, we as we met them the other night for the first time, some of them talked about this being their 40. One guy it was his 40th submission to the contest where he finally made it into the book and into the workshop, and others had similar, though not quite so lengthy, not quite so epic a story. The difference between the Writers of the Future contest, I don't think of it as an easy way in at all. It's got a very high standard. There are people who get published in the magazines who aren't good enough for this contest.
That's true.
And because everybody who's beginning, who knows anything, knows to submit their stories to Writers of the Future. I tell my students that. I say, if you're writing science fiction or fantasy, and you start out with a short story, or you have excerpted a short story from your novel, there's only one place to send it first, and that's Writers of the Future. And the reason is, first, because Writers of the Future responds within 3 months. There's a contest every quarter, so that you don't wait for a year and a half for it to move around on the editor's desk until it finally catches his eye. It's going to be read soon, and it's going to be responded to. Plus, you're going to get some feedback. It's not going to be an elaborate critique of your story, I don't think. I don't think anybody has time for that. But it's going to be, if you're on the right track, you'll get an honorable mention, or I just heard about it this time, a silver honorable mention. I didn't know those existed. I'm waiting for the gold and platinum later. But you'll get some feedback, some positive response if you're on the right track. But the main reason you submit to Writers of the Future is because if you make it into the book, your career has begun. As soon as you have that credential, that you're in Writers of the Future Volume X, editors at book publishing houses will give your submission package, your query letter, your manuscript a much closer look. They will, I don't want to say closer, they're responsible humans, they look closely at everything. What it is they'll enter your manuscript with hope. Writers of the Future gives them hope because they'll know that you have met the professional standard of a first-rate short fiction publication. And as the magazines die, they fade from, I think Asimov's had more than 100,000 circulation about 10 years ago, and now, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's way less than that. And that was the best, and analog was way down. Writers of the Future is now by far the best short story market in science fiction and fantasy, because this is a book that hits the lists, and people buy it to read it. They pay attention to the stories that are in it. So this is the launch of a career. And even if they decide that they want to be hobbyists after all, it ain't because they weren't invited to the party.
Right. And the big advantage for a beginning unknown writer, it's not that getting into Writers of the Future book is easy. The big advantage is that you're not in competition with the name writers, the previously established writers. Certainly the standards inevitably must be very high for Writers of the Future simply because of the enormous volume of submissions. And so there is a distillation that takes place, but everybody at least starts on an equal, which is to say unknown, footing.
Yeah. Now, when someone does enter Writers of the Future, we have, of course, the finalists and our winners that you hear about, but there are thousands of entries each quarter now. And when we get those entries, one of the things that I always look at is very often I'll see stories and I'll go, there's something good about this story. I want to congratulate the author or give them some sort of kudos. And so we have a number of different awards that they can receive. And of course, at the lowest level is honorable mention. And I don't want to say...
Which is still better than nothing.
Which is still better than nothing, yeah. And the honorable mention basically can mean a couple of different things. Sometimes I'll see a story and I'll think, that's a really cool idea. Or this is a great opening, but then it kind of dies on page 7 or something. And I want to say, you got my attention, okay? And so there's that honorable mention. But at the end of any given quarter, I have a list of stories that I'm considering as finalists. Right now, I've got 25 finalists, and I've got to narrow it down to 8. And some of those stories I might find one or two things wrong with that just maybe needs a little tiny bit of work. And those very often will be honorable mentions too. Silver honorable mentions are stories that are pretty much publishable just as they are. Very often, as Tim mentioned, the stories that didn't win in Writers of the Future will go on to be published in other magazines. And I see my silver honorable mention stories all the time being published in other magazines. And then, of course, there's beyond that, we have the level of semifinalist. A semifinalist story is one that came very, very close to being a finalist, and I will offer a critique on that, saying this is what I think you need to do. And in some cases, one young man turned in a piece, and I said, send this to Analog, and it won Story of the Year at Analog after we did it.
And of course, it would break your heart to have to actually name this person.
It was Brad Torgerson.
Oh, okay. Believable, yes.
And so, there are times when I'll get a story. Actually, I think that particular story was actually a finalist. And he said, "Why didn't this make it?" And I said, "This was just the wrong market for it. This was a perfectly fine story, and I couldn't quite believe that we didn't give it a
But
a first or second or
you have
third."
to choose
Yeah.
one,
Yeah, you have to choose one. And what it comes down to in Writers of the Future, I think very often I get stories that are solidly written, and yet we also have that level of stylistic expertise that comes into it. That there's a lot of wordplay and things like that, and I think the judges tend to look at the story in different levels. Is this a good, solid story? Yep. And then on the level of how beautifully written is it, they're going to look at the metaphors and the similes and the poetic diction and this type of thing, and that might score a few extra points. And so sometimes a story that will do well in another market won't necessarily do great in the contest. But in any case, we have those levels, and then of course we have our winners for first, second, and third place, and each year we're going to choose one of our first place stories will end up being the grand prize winner for the year and get the $5,000 bonus check. So we try to really do as much as we can to help people out. And I think every quarter I feel this sinking sense that I wish I could do more, that I could give another 200 critiques or something like that. But there just are not enough hours in the day to do everything that you'd like to do.
But when you talk about the judges of the final contest, I mean, you have already chosen the quarterly winners, and then basically the panel of judges are choosing among those four winners, right?
Eight winners, yes.
Eight winners for the story of the year. And
for the story of the year, yeah.
I have nothing to do with the illustrators. I love illustrators, but we aren't talking to them. They don't care about us.
No.
But when you talk about, there's some more attention to language and et cetera, it sounds like we are encouraging people to write fancier in order to win. And I just want to say, I'm only one of the judges, and I'm sure I'm outvoted every time. But I loathe anything that says, see me right, aren't I clever?
Yeah,
and so
I
that
know
will
what you mean.
never be my choice. I will always cast a vote for one that is a plain tale, plainly told,
I think
without
that is,
any tricks.
I think that's the prevailing opinion, unstated, but I think probably all the judges feel that way. And I've always been impressed with the breadth of subcategories of science fiction fantasy that the contest embraces. It goes from, there might be very hard technical science fiction to the more psychological sorts of things to fantasy to horror. Always, I think we're keeping in mind the readership. Who are they? And it's always seemed to me that we're aiming at readership sort of middle school and up in age, all the way to extreme old age.
My age, okay.
There you go. My age even, yes. But one of the values that I think leads to what Scott was talking about is the variety of the judges. And I know when I first was asked by Algis Budrys to be a judge, I was very impressed by who the other judges were. Over the years, the judges for this contest have included Jack Williamson, C.L. Moore, Roger Zelazny, Frank Herbert, Anne McCaffrey, good God.
Him too.
And Orson Scott Card, and Dave Wolverton. But it's always a group of people who really do know, both as discerning readers and as writers themselves, what's good, where I don't think a panel of academic literary specialists could do nearly as well at choosing what readers will turn out actually to like.
Yeah.
Now,
Because this is reader-driven in the sense
Right.
that if readers don't want this book, the book doesn't succeed. It doesn't do any good for
Why
anybody.
did we bother in that
And
case?
so it's a book that is meant to be read by the person who buys it. This isn't a gift book. This is a selfish, entertainment-hungry reader's purchase
Right.
for himself.
Right.
One of the things that I do when I'm looking at the stories, as potential finalists, is I've always loved the idea of trying to capture the breadth and the depth of what is science fiction and fantasy and horror. There's nothing that's excluded in that. I don't say, oh gosh, I don't like contemporary fantasy, okay? And so I'm not going to choose one of those. If I get a good story about a werewolf detective in the modern day, it's a good story, and that's really all that I judge it on. I'm always looking for comedy. I'm always looking for off-world science fiction. I'm always looking for just about everything. And one of the problems that I sometimes have is I'll get stories that are too similar. I've had quarters where I had one quarter, for example, where I got 6 really good ghost stories. And I thought, I can't turn in 8 ghost stories to the judges, or they would wonder if I had gone insane.
Ghosts of the future, yeah.
So I chose the best ghost story that I could. It won first place, but that meant that the second and third place ghost stories didn't go to the judges. So I try to get that depth and breadth, and then that is what makes judging so difficult, because if I'm giving you apples, oranges, pears, bananas, and pomegranates, I don't know if you're going to choose the pomegranates or what, As far as the judges go.
And we can't, we have our own biases. I want you to know, the only circumstance in which I will ever read a zombie story or a vampire story is if it's one of the finalists I'm judging in Writers of the Future, because I repel those stories. I cannot bear to read 2 pages into one. And so, sorry, this means that I have not, in fact, read Twilight. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because I knew it was a vampire story going in, and there was just no way. It cannot hold my attention. But as a judge of a contest, I trust the original judge. I know that if Dave, or previously Algis Budrys, has chosen this as a quarterly winner, that it has merit beyond its subject matter. And that means that I'm going to give it a fair read, which is an effort of will in some of these categories.
Yes, and I think that's one of the advantages of having so many judges, because yes, each of us has our own iron-bound prejudices.
Yeah.
Mine will be different from yours. I'm not crazy about imaginary worlds with swords and wizards. And so I approach stories like that with a perceptible speed bump in the way.
We'll try not to tell George Martin about your feelings here.
I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't. And I have a instinctive speed bump against stories told in the present tense.
Yeah.
Though one of the ones this quarter was, and I forced myself to get over that speed bump because it had been selected. Dave thought it was worth reading. And in fact, it was one of my final favorites. I don't remember if I voted it number 1 or number 2, but in spite of my prejudice, I was able to see that it was real good. And all of us will have those prejudices, which is why it's a good thing to have quite a broad spectrum of judges, so that one person's bad attitude is not going to prevail without contest.
I think all of the judges have the integrity to give a fair shake to every story that comes along. And it's worth remembering one kind of law, I think, of fiction writing, which is a good enough story can transcend, can overcome any barriers in the actual writing.
Yeah.
So because,
Such as this one in the present tense,
right,
this time.
I liked it. It was, I think, my second choice this time. And it wasn't second because it was in present tense. The first place was first place because it was simply, unarguably, without question, the best.
I think I went with the same first place. It was kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it was, and so I would have been content to have a present tense story win if it's the best of the 4 that we're choosing from. But let it be said that if the story is strong enough, then you can make mistakes. You can do things that trigger people's prejudices and annoy people. Present tense is simply annoying. It's not a natural narrative voice for English. But nevertheless, if the story is strong, and by story I don't mean the manuscript, the writing, the words that you choose. I mean the actual plain tale, what happens and why, which can be told in any language. That's the translatable part of the story. The part that can be rendered in another language is the pure tale.
That's very good.
And it's the one that can be adapted into other media. You can turn it into an epic poem, and as long as the same things happen, it's the same story. I have to say epic poem because I'm sick of everybody saying, "Oh, that was so good, it should be made into a movie." And I'm going, no. It's so good, it should be made into an epic poem. Shut up. Homer's lasted way longer than any movie ever.
Good point.
But if you have a story that you believe in and care about, and you're afraid you don't have the skills, don't do what Edgar Rice Burroughs did when he started out and try to write it in your most florid prose. It makes Tarzan almost unreadable to a grown-up. 12-year-olds can still read it, but it's really hard to slog through the mud of Edgar Rice Burroughs's overwrought attempts at purple prose. Don't try to write your way into victory. Just tell the story. And if the story's good, whatever your natural language is, chances are your best style is just writing as if you were telling the story to a friend.
Yeah, I've always figured the best style is the one you're least aware of using.
Absolutely.
And the old analogy of the story should be a clear pane of glass through which we can see out on the lawn all the events happening. You don't want fancy etching and stained glass getting in the way.
Exactly, yeah.
Though there are critics who only look at the etching on the stain,
Yes,
on the glass and the color and everything.
And they see
and
those-
they don't care what goes on.
No, in fact, to them, those figures out on the lawn are simply metaphors.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember when I was trying to get a terminal degree, so I entered a creative writing program at a university, and with the idea of getting an MFA or I can't remember if it was a doctorate. It doesn't matter. Who cares? What mattered was I remember trying as an old pro by then. I was well into my late 30s. I'd already published many books by then, and I remember walking with them to a confab of just the grad students, and one of the guys, the one who thought of himself as the leading talent, the light of everyone else's life, there's always one in every graduate program, started going on about how, well, it doesn't really matter what the story's about. It's you just got to find a style. You got to find your style, and until you find your style, who cares what the story is? You got to get that style. And I'm just thinking,
I'm sure he's
Man.
prospered.
Well, he's probably teaching creative writing somewhere, saying the same thing to his students, and thereby breaking their fingers before they start trying to type their way into fame and fortune, because the audience does care about the story. They always care about the story, even people who are lionized as being literary successes. I think of Ann Tyler or Richard Russo, two of the best writers I've ever read, or at least early Richard Russo. He's become more academic later in his career, which was a disappointment to me. Or John Irving, who, especially early on, just a great storyteller. And all of the little Phillips and curlicues of literary writing are present, but they all know what a story is, and therefore they can identify when they have one. And sometimes they're wrong, but not always. They're often right, that they found a story.
Another advantage occurs to me of Dave and our broad panel of judges, which include Larry Niven, Mike Resnick, et cetera, Silverberg, although he's now an emeritus judge. It frees the anthology, it frees our selection of stories from being strictly trends of 2019. Any decade, especially it's noticeable in science fiction, has had its pet obsessions, which it seems to dwell on for about 5 years, and then that becomes quaint. Certainly in 1969, 1970, our field was obsessed with student unrest and the Vietnam War, and those stories look quaint now. I think current magazines show signs of being obsessed with the default attitudes and philosophies of 2019, and I think they're going to look quaint in 5 or 10 years.
Everybody's hero, no matter what era they live in, is a social justice warrior. So,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Right. But with Dave's filter and our broad panel of judges, I think we have a much bigger chronological footprint, philosophical footprint, which would be important for any fiction, but I think especially when you're dealing with science fiction and fantasy, which is supposed to have a galactic perspective.
Yeah.
It's not only valuable, but really essential to transcend the focus of spring 2019.
Well, one of the best things about science fiction is that the entire history of science fiction is still alive and in print.
Yeah.
You can still buy from the shelf books from the, quote, golden age, the space opera era, and you can buy Campbellian stories, and you can still write in every one of those genres.
And I think it's important for writers to be familiar with our roots, our history, our origins.
Well, see, what it is all of that history of science fiction is the toolkit from which every writer can draw at any time. And you can still write stories that might be reminiscent of James Blish. You can still write stories that might be reminiscent of Lee Brackett.
I'm crazy about Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore.
Yeah, and when you find those favorites, and it's, by the way, it's also okay for writers to hate anybody anytime too.
True.
As soon as you decide you're a writer, you're the peer of all the other writers. So if you decide you detest Dune, it means you're an idiot, but it also means that you're not going to be writing imitation Herbert. You're going to find something else to write. And sometimes what you want to do is you aspire to be as clear as Asimov. What a noble aspiration for the supreme stylist of American prose fiction. It's just one of those things that it makes science fiction so rich, is that our old fiction is not dead.
Right, and a new writer is free to borrow, be influenced by...
Steal, come on, just
steal
say it.
is what I meant. I do it myself a lot. From a very broad spectrum, I've stolen from, just thinking of one of my books in particular, Lovecraft, Michael Moorcock, and Robert Heinlein.
And if you can combine them in one book, it's new territory.
Yeah.
And it is, as you say, having a very broad toolkit with lots of drawers and little trays in it.
and little tools that no one knows what they were made for.
Right.
But you find a purpose, even if it's just to prop up the desk.
That's right.
So it's always fun for me to finish up a contest and to send in the finalist stories and to see which ones the judges are going to choose as our first, second, and third place every quarter. And it never ceases to amaze me to see what comes through the gates, because as you say, each of our finalists is influenced from so many different people in so many different ways. I got a story recently that was strongly influenced by William Shakespeare, written in iambic pentameter. And
That is a brave or stupid
Yeah, all
writer.
right.
that was a brilliant move in this particular case. Unfortunately, the judges didn't get to see that one because it turned out that the writer had won a previous quarter and had to pull that particular story.
Oh, man.
But
I hope she sells it
I-
profitably elsewhere.
I think that they will. But in any case, this contest has gone on for 35 years. I'm sure we'll probably go on for another 35, the way that things are going. It seems to be getting bigger and better with every quarter. L. Ron Hubbard endowed it originally and continues to make sure that it moves forward. And I'm really excited to just see what the future of the contest is in 35 years. I don't think that any one of us three will be around 35 years from now.
Very unlikely.
But it'll be fun to see.
I have to say that L. Ron Hubbard's concern for beginning writers was evidenced all the way through his career.
Yeah.
And he was, he had that regard for new writers from a pinnacle of achievement and success. This is not the kind of celebrity that sneers at people who are lower down the ladder. This was the kind of celebrity that was translated into leadership and the desire to help bring other people along. That's been a common thread in much of the science fiction community for a long time. Not perfect, it doesn't always happen, but we help each other. We don't regard each other as rivals. We understand that our competition is napping. Our competition is fixing dinner. And if we can make somebody not have dinner ready because they couldn't put down our story, we win. But it's not about me trying to outsell some other writer. Who cares? You can't control that anyway. What you can control is the ones who do pick your story, at the end, are they eager to tell their friends? And that's what we all aspire to. That's the reason, I think, why L. Ron Hubbard's effort here has succeeded, is that there have always been judges who have chosen the kind of story that people are eager to give to their friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, as you say, it's clear that Hubbard, throughout his career, was, instead of trying to exclude competition, was trying to encourage and bring out other good writers. All his essays on story structure, how to do suspense, how to come up with ideas for stories, how to make them more convincing, how to market them, how most effectively to make a career of it, was deliberately fostering competition. And then, of course, the contest itself, which exists entirely to find talented but unpublished people and change them into talented published people. It's all to bring in as many great science fiction stories as is possible. And yeah, this isn't competition for the rest of us. It's that old high tide lifts all boats cliche.
Truism.
A truism. But yeah, if the field is good and prospering, so are we all. And so yeah, it is fun. It has been fun for 30 years now to participate, to help and exaggerate my own participation in the careers of all the people that have come through this.
Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for our next installment of the Writers of the Future podcast. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to new and amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy.